Hey everyone, Zoe Kirby here. I am going to be talking about a little bit about the fallout from some of the group chat messages. Sorry, I gotta scroll back up here. Sorry to anybody who gets vertigo from this sort of thing. This is from the European version of Politico here. Talking kind of about Europe's reactions to some of the leaked messages in the Signal chat that I'm going to also talk about a little bit more just because of my own differing philosophies on just people's access to this sort of thing. So I'm going to kind of read through parts of this article and then kind of talk about the implications of it really quick. So Europe views the Trump team's insults in leaked Signal chat. Quote, British forces already took place in strikes against Houthis, so don't call us, quote, freeloaders, end quote, former defense secretary says. And this has to do in reference to, in the Signal chat, I think there's somebody that calls Europe freeloaders. So this article in Politico is by Tim Ross, Esther Weber, I cannot say that last name, but Jacopo Birgazzati and Nicholas Vineker. Oh my gosh, that's not very good. So just to kind of go through this here, we'll just kind of go paragraph by paragraph very quickly, and I guess I'll just give my thoughts as we go on. Here. Okay. And I haven't gone through the Atlantic article because I will be going through that in a separate video. Quote, sometimes it's better not to know what your so-called friends say behind your back. Case in point, colon, when your closest ally calls you, quote, pathetic, that's in all caps, by the way, accuses you of, quote, freeloading, end quote, and says you should be made to pay for something you never knew they were going to do. Are they talking about bombing? Wait, were they claiming in the Signal chat that they should be paying? Europe should be paying for the bombing of the Houthis? I don't know. I don't know. That's weird. I don't have the answer to that. British and European officials and diplomats reacted with a mix of hurt and anger to the leak of private messages between top figures in Donald Trump's U.S. government about plans for airstrikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen. According to The Atlantic, whose editor-in-chief was mistakenly added to the high-level group chat, which is really funny because if they can't, and one of the diplomats, one of the people that's quoted in Europe says, if they can't handle a Signal chat, what makes us think that they are competent in handling the world's strongest military? Which is a really good point. So, quote, according to The Atlantic, whose editor-in-chief was mistakenly added to the high-level group chat, Vice President J.D. Vance, which one of the things I hated about the screenshot very quickly, sorry to interrupt, was that like J.D. Vance doesn't have a picture or anything. It just says J.D. in his picture, and like it's kind of hilarious in a very dark way that no picture is attached to like him going like, yeah, we bombed the Houthis. It's just dark and sad. Anyway, Vice President J.D. Vance said he hated, and this is a quote from him, bailing out Europe again, end quote, which, okay, how is bombing the Houthis bailing out Europe when it's a targeted strike from what I understand to be their stopping of like, freight ships in the particular sea, or the strait, like the trading, whatever you call it, that they're blocking. I can't remember if it's the Red Sea or the Dead Sea. I don't remember exactly which sea it is that they have, because they control a certain, like, a very important trade route that goes through Yemen. I will probably update with the right information when I'm editing this video. It has to do with that. How are they bailing out Europe? What does Europe have to do with the United States, like, bombing the crap out of Yemen and the Houthis? I don't think it does. So back to the article. By launching the military action to protect shipping, which, again, like, maybe they're saying they're bailing out European trade, which, okay. Mainly to benefit European trade. Okay, but how much of European trade has been stopped by the Houthis? I know that they've directly targeted and stopped Israeli freights. I guess I would have to do more digging onto that, and I might add it in the video here. So, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth replied to Vance, quote, "I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic." Okay, so our Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called all of Europe freeloaders? For what? I mean, we're in a trade alliance. They're one of our closest allies, and there's even some policies that they resist vehemently in Europe, that they don't really show an official trade policy, because if they did, they'd be removed from the global financial system. I mean, pathetic European freeloading? Anyway, this is kind of the important bit here, are some of the responses from diplomats in Europe there. And it's kind of just showing more and more of a strained relationship on the United States and Europe. As the Trump administration goes on, let's keep reading. A UK diplomat said they had watched aghast as the spectacular leak emerged on Monday night, describing it as, quote, wild. The diplomat noted that it underlined the impression that Vance was the driver of U.S. hostility towards Europe, which, right, there's he has hostility towards Europe, but he has no problem with trying to meet people in Greenland for God knows what, and then no one showed up. The person said, forced others, including Trump, into a tougher position because he, quote, doesn't want to look weaker than Vance. I mean, what could possibly be driving hostility toward Europe in this moment from Vance besides his quote, because of their freeloading? I mean, that's kind of what he states, but is that really why he feels that way? I don't really know. Anyway, and this is kind of an important bit that I want to focus on here, is that in public, meaning outward facing to the world, UK ministers and officials tried to minimize the damage from the revelations, meaning that they tried to downplay a lot of what that meant for their relationship with the United States, insisting the alliance within the U.S. was strong and communications remained secure. But former Defense Secretary Grant Shapps, not quite sure who that is, but he'd be good to know, said that some in the Trump regime, I'm not calling them administration, clearly needed re-educating about their allies. It was wrong of them to say European militaries had done nothing to address the problem of Iran-backed Houthis targeting commercial shipping. Sorry, he said. And it'd be interesting to look into how much Europe has actually done to help with that effort. I am unsure in this moment. Okay. To continue on with the article here, the leaked messages even included a conversation about how to make Europe, quote, remunerate, that's a weird word, end quote, the U.S. for the cost of the military action. Okay, so it is ostensibly to protect European trade. Wouldn't that be the United States' job as a close ally to Europe? And so then they have to repay for a military action that Europe never even approved of? I mean, the United States Congress didn't even approve of this military action. How could Europe? That's ridiculous. And this idea that we should be sending this bill back to Europe is laughable. Anyway, so to go here, this is from Shapps on X, who is did it say former defense minister? Let me go back to see. He is the former defense secretary. I'm not sure under what administration in Britain, but he continued to say on X, and I quote, "I agree Europe must do more on security." I don't know what that means. Shapps posted on Twitter, but Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer should remind the USA the UK led from the front. I authorized 4 RAF strikes on the Houthis, and the Royal Military defended Red Sea shipping, so it is in the Red Sea. Our forces risked their lives to protect trade. Some in D.C. need reminding. So I don't agree with bombing the Houthis. There's actually a very good article in Foreign Policy that talks about why bombing the Houthis only really strengthened their position from a geopolitical standpoint. Just a second. I need to take a screenshot. Sorry about the audio here. And okay, so he's saying that he authorized 4 RAF strikes. I would need to look into what that is. While Defense Secretary is my assumption. So there's more critics here. Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, which tends to mean a conservative organization, at least internationally. A British opposition party said, and I quote, JD and his mates clearly aren't fit to run a group chat, let alone the world's strongest military. It has to make our security services nervous about the intelligence we're sharing with them. Which I think kind of probably highlights an interesting piece and dynamic in the current relationship that the United States under the second Trump regime has with Europe. He's kind of saying here, if they can't really keep information secure over a Signal chat, which why are you talking about official U.S. government actions over Signal? Like, that's kind of crazy, dude. So they're saying, okay, well, if that's the case, if they can't keep things from leaking from a group chat, adding a journalist from The Atlantic to a group chat that he shouldn't be a part of, then I would imagine one like Ed Davey says here, they're not fit to run the world's strongest military force. And it says it has to make our security services nervous about the intelligence that we're sharing with them. So, yeah, and this article continues here. Elsewhere in Europe, the tone among diplomats was more of grief and resignation. Any hope that they had held that Vance and his colleagues were putting on a public show of aggression towards Europe while being more sympathetic in private vanished. So I think that's what that is saying there, is that, okay, so they were thinking maybe that the Trump regime and Vance and those others were being aggressive towards Europe was more of like what you could call political theater, and maybe in private they were more sympathetic to a lot of European aims. That hope there vanished. This idea that the United States had any kind of sympathy for Europe in any way had potentially an air of plausible deniability when we don't really always know what's going on behind closed doors. What this is kind of saying is that there was a hope in Europe that what they were saying publicly wasn't exactly everything that they were believing and saying in private, which isn't the case here. So, quote, it's sobering to see the way that they speak about Europe when they think no one is listening. One EU diplomat said, granted anonymity, like others, to give a candid view. Quote, but at the same time, this isn't surprising. It's just that now we see their reasoning in all its undiplomatic glory. So, one of the European Union officials is kind of saying, okay, well, we weren't necessarily surprised, but we're just kind of seeing the the wizard behind the hood, so to speak. Let's see if there's anything else that's more important. And an EU official said Vance happens to be the ideologue this time around, but he is bound to make mistakes and eventually drop the ball. After all, at some point, the U.S. will return to being a reliable partner, the official said. I don't know if that's the case. A second EU diplomat agreed that history suggested America would one day return to its role as a solid ally for Europe. Again, we don't know if that's going to be the case. A lot of the Trump administration's posturing seems to be less on the side of Europe these days, so we don't really know. I think that's these diplomats kind of inserting their own hopeful views, saying like, okay, well, this is kind of what we would want to happen. But we aren't. No one could be for sure on that sort of thing. And this second EU diplomat said, quote, for the time being, and despite the sometimes nice diplomatic words, trust is broken. The diplomat said, there is no alliance with trust, so I think Europe has to do much more because it has no other choice. As for charging Europeans for the operation, a senior UN official added, quote, we haven't received the bill yet, end quote. How don't you love when they get snarky like that? We haven't got the bill yet for that shit, which is kind of their way of saying, yeah, good luck, seems to me. But So, kind of what I think is being highlighted here is that there is less and less Trump between Europe and the Trump-ran United States government these days. Trust is very broken, and I think it's going to take more than I think what the European Union officials, like diplomats, wanted to necessarily enclose to be able to rebuild those types of relations. And there was another leak. I would need to find the article that discusses it, that talks about that if Russia attacks Europe, that the United States may not actually defend them. There is even talks within NATO, the North American Trade Organization, talking about potentially phasing the United States out of the funding. So things are much, much more strained between Europe and the United States than it might seem. Over a lot of different things, same with Palestine as well. But just figured I would give you guys information on that. What do you think of the current regime's relationship with Europe? Do you think it is as strained as the EU officials claimed? Do you think it's more strained? What do you think about senior Trump administration officials hooting and hollering about a strike that presumably killed people in a Signal group chat? I'd love to hear what you've got to say about that. And hopefully I'll be adding more color to something like this as time goes forward. And I will see you guys in the next report. And I'm trying to get more and more of these videos out, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on things. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.